Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm Terry Madonna. Well, we're going into a new year, but let's take a look at the past year in Pennsylvania politics and state government. We'll take a look at the big stories of the year, and we'll do all of that after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, as we often do, we take a look at the year in review, and we'll look ahead a bit at the likely big stories of 2018. And before I get into the introductions of our guests, I want to thank you for your viewership over the past year and over the more than 20 years this program has been on the air. It's all about you. What we try to do is to bring you stories and events that matter, not just having to do with politics and government, but healthcare and energy and transportation. And we're going to continue to do that through the next calendar year. Now, joining me to take a look at the big stories of the year, sitting on my right, which would be on your left, is Marc Levy with the Associated Press. And across the table from me, Steve Esack from the Allentown Morning Call and Angela Couloumbis with the Philadelphia Inquirer. As we were chatting, Angela, before the program, you all were chatting about the big stories, and there are 4 or 5 of them, not arguably, that would be on the list. Each of you get to pick one, and you got to pick a different one from the one that the person before you has picked. What's your big story of the year?
Well, we have to talk about the state budget because it did dominate really the conversation in the state capitol for probably the first 9 months of the year. And essentially what happened there is that the legislature passed a spending plan by the July 1st deadline, like they are supposed to do and like they have been unable to do for several years.
And there's a but coming.
There's a big but coming. After that, they couldn't agree on how to pay for it. So they spent the next almost 4 months arguing over whether to pay for it, with a fundamental problem being whether and how much to raise any taxes.
Right. So yours is the imbroglio, I'll put it that way, over the taxes, and we'll see. Maybe that'll be the big story next year again with the deficit, likely state budget deficit. Steve, go ahead.
I guess the other big story, it was a relatively quiet year, I guess, but there were like individual issues with individual lawmakers. You had the Lieutenant Governor Mike Stack with getting reprimanded by Governor Wolf, his supposed partner, over the way the Lieutenant Governor Stack and his wife treated state troopers and other employees over at the mansion, and that is continuing because the governor had his Inspector General's office issue a report on it, but the governor is refusing to let that report out. And then there's a bunch of other political stuff too involving individual folks too. That's interesting.
Your turn.
So I guess part and parcel of the whole big budget fight in the Capitol was a massive expansion of gambling. Pennsylvania is already the #2 commercial gambling state in the nation, and this will be a very public manifestation of how the state budgets. People will see casinos. They'll have more ways to gamble.
10 mini casinos, right?
There could be a mini casino coming to your neighborhood.
Oh, thanks.
Or anyone else's neighborhood. They should be able to gamble at airports in the coming year or so. Online.
Machines, right?
Online truck stops. This bill made Pennsylvania the first state in the nation to legalize online casino gambling and online lottery play.
Wow. All right. Anybody want to comment on anything that anybody else has said?
As Mark said, coming up on January 10th, the State Gaming Board will have the first public auction for those mini casinos. We'll see if anybody, the existing dozen casinos, get first dibs at that. And we'll see if any of them want to jump on it.
And municipalities can opt out by the end of the year. Is that correct?
Yes, and many of them have.
They can opt out, meaning that no mini casino could get within the boundary lines of that municipality, correct?
Right.
And the state law has that 25-mile radius too that says you can't open a mini casino around an existing casino.
So. All right, let's go to the second. You get to pick what's your top second issue?
Well, personally, from the stories that I did, I enjoyed, delving into like a policy wonk issue of the way that states, Pennsylvania and many other states have trouble getting revenue from online sales, and then that issue percolated into the budget discussion. Now Pennsylvania has instituted a new law requiring basically all online merchants to remit their sales tax to Pennsylvania, like many other states have. There's several U.S. Supreme Court cases that are percolating on this, and I assume Pennsylvania is going to be wrapped into that.
Now, that's not before I get to Mark, we're probably going to run to a break, but we have a couple of seconds left in this segment. But it didn't get a lot of ink, but it's important for the revenue purposes, given the deficit. Angela's shaking her head.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, next year, and we'll get to that, there's going to be a big fight over raising new revenue and how to get there.
Right.
And it's going to be an election year, which is going to make it even more difficult.
All right. Well, when we come back, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Marc Levy is going to help us out and give us his second important story of the past calendar year.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, we're taking a look at the big stories for the 2017 calendar year. We're focusing on state government and state politics. Joining me to do that is Angela Couloumbis, Steve Esack, and sitting to my right, your left, is Marc Levy with the Associated Press. Mark, pick one.
I think politics. It's been a remarkable year for people getting into races that will play out in 2018. So we have some wide open congressional races. We have a wide open Republican primary on the Republican side. That hasn't happened in probably 40 years, where going into the coming weeks, the party doesn't know who it's going to endorse in the primary.
If any, right?
If anybody.
They don't have to endorse.
There's been a sort of a sweepstakes to get into the U.S. Senate campaign to challenge the Democrat Bob Casey. We now see a U.S. Representative Lou Barletta getting in, and he'll most likely get the party endorsement.
So your point is that we're not even into the next calendar year, and already we're in a full-throated race for who's going to, well, I almost said succeed Governor Wolf, but Governor Wolf could obviously win re-election, right? Yeah, and Senator Casey as well. Yeah,
and it's been a remarkable year to see how Donald Trump's polling numbers have affected who's getting in, and how Republicans are preparing for next year. There's a lot of concern about them losing some of their congressional seats, losing some of their legislative seats in the state. And, we see Charlie Dent, the moderate Republican from eastern Pennsylvania, he's leaving Congress. And there's got to be a concern for a lot of moderates in Congress and the legislature that they won't survive a general election or a primary.
Right. So, Angela, of all these stories, which one do you, when you've written, and you've written them weekly, what kind of response have you gotten? I mean, was there any story that stands out that you can cite where people got excited? We get into the budget, but the average person, not so much. Is there anything, the social issues you didn't hear much about, abortion and...
A little bit towards the end of the year, there was a very controversial vote on an abortion ban.
That's a good point. Talk about that.
So there was a bill that would roll back abortion rights in Pennsylvania. It would essentially ban abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy rather than 24 weeks as it currently stands, which brought out a lot of women who have had, basically at the 20th week of pregnancy, you find out a lot about the health of your pregnancy. And these women were saying, you were shackling us from being able to make these very emotional, difficult decisions about the futures of our families. So there was a vote on that in the Senate earlier in the year. That created a lot of controversy and a lot of feedback. I would also say, on a much lighter note, there was a lot of feedback about a law that was signed by Governor Wolf and passed by the legislature called Libre's Law. It had to do with essentially animal protection and protection from abuse. And it created, in a nutshell, stricter guidelines, stricter laws for people who violate the law.
Go ahead. Yeah. Now, as you covered, what story did you think got a lot of excitement from, interest, I should say, from the electorate?
Well, locally in the Lehigh Valley, Mark brought up the 15th Congressional District, which covers most of the Lehigh Valley.
Charlie Dent, right?
Yes, and that has a lot of Republicans running on it. Laura Olson and I, another reporter at the Morning Call, we did a story comparing. At the time, we're probably the two leading candidates to replace Charlie Dent, and that was State Representative Justin Simmons and Ryan McKenzie, and we compared their absentee rates over at the state capitol.
I know where you're heading with this.
Well, Justin Simmons had like 500 and some absences compared to Ryan McKenzie's with like 28, missed the votes and that kind of thing. Shortly after that story ran, Justin Simmons dropped out of the race, and that's changed the dynamic now.
Yeah.
Where McKenzie's still running, then you have a Lehigh County Commissioner running, Marty Nostine, and you have a Dauphin County Commissioner running, Mike Preece, I believe, and so that's opened the whole thing up, and it's a matter.
So we're not even into next year, and we're already. But all of you are talking about these elections that are fomenting out there, bubbling up with some controversies involved. Yeah. Before we go ahead.
And I was just going to say too is this election with how Donald Trump's overall poor ratings are as far as popularity is concerned is really going to be a referendum on whether the Democrats can turn their luck around. And if they do, that probably most likely throws out all these redistricting lawsuits that are in federal court and in the state court right now.
Good point. All right, we're going to run to a break. We come back. We're not through with these yet. Now, we want to look ahead. We're doing that a little bit, but there could be some pretty big stories, most of them I think having to do with elections, but we also have something called another state budget. I know it gets, how should I put this, a little heavy out there when we talk about the numbers, but we'll do that and more after this commercial break.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org, and by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
All right, Mark, your turn. Big stories of the year.
So there was a lot of ink spilled on the idea that there's two lawsuits, maybe a third actually, pending seeking to overturn Pennsylvania's congressional districts. The map that was drawn in 2011 and signed by the Republican governor, Tom Corbett, at the time, has drawn national attention for the outlandish shapes the districts are drawn in. They were drawn that way to preserve 12 Republican incumbents at the time, and it actually created the conditions for a 13th Republican to win a seat out of 18 total. So there are lawsuits challenging those, saying they are unduly political and that they should be struck down. And so we have a case in federal court in Philadelphia and a state court in Harrisburg that are speeding potentially towards a resolution.
Yeah, and the whole point about this is I was stunned by the fact that there was nothing done in 2012, 2014, 2016. This year is the year the lawsuits were filed, and the point now is to try to get a decision that would force the redistricting, the boundary lines redrawn before the primary elections coming up in May of this year for the seats in Congress. Am I right or wrong about that?
That's right, yeah. So it's an incredibly compressed timeline. These maps are supposed to be redrawn after the 2020 census anyway to
Correct.
adjust for demographic changes.
2021, right.
But the courts, as soon as they got these lawsuits, put it on a fast track, and it shows these judges are very serious about this case, and it tells you that there could be something here very shortly that orders the legislature to redraw these districts. And the deadline to file your petitions to get on the ballot for the primary in these congressional districts is, I think, March 5th, March 6th, around there. So,
Steve, one of the big issues that we heard about last year was Marcellus Shale. I mean, this is the severance tax, the amount of cubic feet that's extracted from the wells. We don't tax that. We do have another kind of a tax on the shale industry, an impact fee, but that came up all year, and it's been one of Governor Wolf's big deals.
Well, it's Marcellus tax was part of the Senate's summertime way to pay for the budget. You know, they instituted a severance tax under the guise that there would be regulatory reform at DEP to help the industry. That idea never made it out of the House. The House Republicans have blocked that all the time, and just in in December, moderate Republicans who are going to probably face a tough re-election in suburban Philadelphia were calling on House Speaker Mike Turzai, one of the most vocal opponents to a severance tax, to call up a vote on this. It was very much, it was a lot of political theater
and
involved in that.
And a candidate for governor, we ought to throw that in, right?
Yeah, and a candidate for governor. That's going to probably hurt Mike Turzai in Southeast PA, and those Republicans out there in Bucks, Montgomery, Chester County, they wanted a vote so they could get their stances on the record. That vote, never came.
A myriad of issues. I mean, it's in so many dimensions that have come up that you've written about. And we also had a situation at Penn State, right?
Yes, so the three big administrators at Penn State went on trial earlier this year. The verdict they were sort of split, but they were convicted of essentially the cover-up of these crimes involving Jerry Sandusky and child sexual abuse.
All right, when we come back, we're going to take a look ahead. We're going to see what's likely to come up in 2018, and then we can have them all back and see how that all goes at the end of the year.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives.
Welcome back. Well, we're going to turn our attention to 2018, a big year in government and politics. I'm going to start with Marc Levy from the Associated Press. What are you looking at?
So I think the first couple months of 2018, a lot of attention will be focused on the 18th Congressional District, which is vacant now because Tim Murphy resigned in the scandal in October. And
that's a southwestern seat, a congressional seat.
Outside of Pittsburgh, that's right. And everyone expects a lot of national money to come pouring in. It is seen as yet another referendum on Donald Trump. Now, this is a district that voted heavily for Donald Trump. It's got a majority Democratic makeup, but those Democrats vote for Republicans at the federal level. Tim Murphy has waltzed to victory in 8 terms. The last 2 terms he wasn't even challenged in the election. So Republicans have a huge advantage, but Democrats have a young candidate named Connor Lamb, and they feel that they might be able to pick off a seat in Congress.
And it's going to be targeted. I mean, you're going to find Democrats want to see, given what's happened in Alabama and Virginia especially, and how well they've done in the 5 congressional races, specials that they've lost, but their voters have turned out in higher numbers. So this is a big story.
It is. It's going to be a very expensive race. It'll be closely watched nationally. A lot of stuff will be written about it, a lot of extrapolation from it. But in the end, the Republicans still have the advantage.
You're going to move to southwestern PA, I think, to cover. Go ahead.
Well, along the lines of what Marc said, is we were talking briefly about the redistricting stuff, and lost within that debate about the maps and stuff like that is how poorly the Democrats in Pennsylvania have funded candidates, found candidates, and actually campaigned well.
Right.
And so I think that what you going to see in the 18th is going to translate across Pennsylvania, and they're going to need to pick up those seats because the House in Pennsylvania and the Senate, they are deeply in the minority, the Democrats, and they're going to need to get.
You're both on to something. We have 3 or 4 other congressional races that are going to be targeted out of our 18. So you're on to something. So what you're both saying, if I can summarize it, is one of the big stories is going to be these important congressional elections with the Democratic effort to take over the House from the Republicans, where they need 24 seats.
And not just in Congress. I'm talking the State House, too, and the state legislature.
All right, pick one.
I'm going to have to say it is the Me Too movement. It was sparked, as your viewers probably already know, by the sexual harassment allegations against Harvey Weinstein. Right. My newspaper, together with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, has already written about a couple of state legislators who have been accused of sexual misconduct, including one where there was a secret, basically payout to settle a sexual harassment claim that nobody knew about, and using taxpayer money.
All right, I'm going to. You brought up a great subject. We now know that it looks like that every area, every level of state government, there have been these payouts of taxpayer dollars without any public awareness. I'll turn to you. Are we going to get more of this? First of all, is there going to be something done about this so the public is aware when these settlements are made? Even before that, maybe there's going to be a move to end the settlements altogether, right, with taxpayer dollars.
There's a bill in the Senate. State Senator Judy Schwenk, Democrat out of Berks County, has a bill to do that, to say you can't have these secret payments using taxpayer money. But I don't expect that to pass the legislature. They don't pass anything. For example, the state Supreme Court strikes down the restitution law, Pennsylvania's restitution law, that says if you're convicted of ripping off a government nonprofit, you don't have to pay restitution. Right. They've known about that for months. They haven't fixed that.
We have about 50 seconds. Would it surprise you if there's more of the information out about sexual harassment claim? Would that be a big shock to you?
No, it wouldn't, because look, there is no law against settling harassment cases with taxpayer money and keeping it secret. Yep, okay. The governor has said that he wants that to stop, but ultimately the legislature's in charge here, and we don't know if they'll act.
Thanks for the great update. All right, we'll see you, can I say it, next year for another year of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well and have a great new year.